So this brings us to the topic that I really want to be able to address, and I'm going to do this over a number of the studies because I want to do it part by part. And that way, if people want to just go ahead and take it apart, like one section versus another versus another. Here's the big picture of it. We know that God made these promises, and really this was the beginning of it, that God made promises to what became Israel, what became the children of Jacob. Jacob is Israel. Okay, so that's the name, and that God changed it. So that helps us to understand that God changed the name from one to the other. But the sons of Jacob are the tribes. So those are the ones who came and settled the land after the Exodus, after Moses, brought into the land through Joshua, and they began to take the land. So all of that was a promise, and it was some 500 years before the events even took place. So it was 500 years that they were going to, from the time that God spoke to Abraham till they started to come back into the land. Because remember, Abraham is told in chapter 15, though we won't get there today, that his descendants, once he finally has them, are going to go away into a captivity for 400 years. Speaking of Egypt. And he has a lot to say, and we'll get to that in one of the later studies. But it all begins at chapter 12. And I want to make sure that we can look at this. And again, people may disagree with this. That's fine, but this is the way I'm presenting it. And if you have any questions about it, you can let me know. In chapter 11, we know that that the time that he was in Haran, he first, it was Ur of the Chaldees, and then they make their way to Haran. In verse 31 of chapter 11, it says, "In Terah, Abram's father, he took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Adam's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to Haran and dwelt there. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran." So that tells you where they are. Now, he's not seen the land, nothing. They're in a completely different part where they started. They're nowhere near. They're still in what is modern day, basically Iraq, in kind of walking or making their way towards Syria. So in chapter 12, there is a change that takes place, and it's the first three, really we'll look at 4 verses that are really important for our understanding here. So it says, "Now the Lord said to Abram." Now Abram is the name that he was known by then, and Abram just translated means exalted father. We're going to get to how God changes that later. He says this. Now this is, again, it's an invitation. And we know it's an invitation because ultimately it says Abram believed God and it was accounted to him as a righteous act. So there was an invitation to Abram. He didn't have to take it. God didn't make him do it. It was his response and his reaction to God that made it a righteous thing. Means that it was his decision. So we read chapter 12, verse 1. It says, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Now, important that we start right there with how old he was, 75 years old, because that's going to play in as we go through this later. Now, again, it's an invitation because this is what God says, here's what I'm offering to you. This is what you will need to do if you accept the offer. You're going to leave and you're going to come follow me. So all of that is put in place here. The important part of this and what we focus on, it's going to be a short examination of this because it's the one that stands on its own, and it's because it's a plural promise. And what I mean by plural, look at what he says. He says in verse 3, "I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you." Now, this is what's going to happen as people begin to interact with him, because God's making a covenant with Abram, and it's going to be that I'm going to make a great nation of you, and through you, and because of you, the nations, and that means that as it says here, the nations or the families of earth. This is a way of saying the generations of man, the nations, depending on your translation, but this is what it's supposed to help us to understand. It's well beyond whatever borders they will ever inhabit as the children of Israel. This means that the nations, plural, of the families of the world, and that means down through time, the whole world will be blessed because of you. Now, he goes on to say this, in you the families of the earth will be blessed. So, at that statement, it says that he departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. They're not in the land when he first hears this. So nowhere in this is any kind of a mention of the land. There's nothing talked about that. There's not talking about descendants other than the nations are going to come from you. He doesn't explain how any of that goes. It's the plurality of the promise that's at stake here, and it's why it's so important. That's why we start with this, and I want to leave it all by itself. So here's part one. Here's the first main bit of our study as we start to lay this out in a chronological order. He hears this where he's not even come into what is the land of Israel, the land of the promise. He has not seen that land. It's not been promised to him. I'm going to take you to a place that's as far as it gets. Doesn't say anything about his descendants. Doesn't say how God's going to make good on any of this. But the thing that's important for us to remember in this is that it's the nations will be blessed because of you. The families of the earth are going to be blessed because of you. Now, that's why it's so very, very important for us to understand just what's being said here, because it's a promise that goes on, and it's going to last. It's going to be in place beyond any kind of a specific time or borders. It's very, very general, and it's as open-ended can get, that the families of the earth will be blessed because of you. And he doesn't give any other details. Once again, let's remember, he's 75 years old. He's not even in the land. He's never even laid eyes on the land that God's taking him to. God has given him very limited information. But the plurality of the promise is what we focus on here in part one. So this is the first that we're doing in this. This is the promise, the plurality made to Abram, that somehow God was going to make to the nations, plural, a blessing. That's all that's told to him. He doesn't know anything else about it. Now we're going to go through, when we get to part two of this, the second in the stage is when he finally gets to the land, and we're going to start to look at what some of those things are. God begins to add some detail. Now, it's not only that he adds detail, but he gives another separate promise. So yes, Abram will have descendants, but some of those descendants are destined for something different. And that's where we need to make sure that there is a fork, if you will, in the road here, and God begins to really narrow down how he's going to do the promise of the land and the people, which is singular through one of his children, only one at the exclusion of all others, which this is very, very open. It's to the nations, plural, way beyond the borders of Israel. It's to the entirety of humanity, and it goes open-ended through time. The one that he gives to Abram about one of his descendants, in this case it's going to be Isaac. We will get to that, but it's a separate promise at a separate time, and it has characteristically very different elements to it. So that's what we're going to look at part two of what will be a multi-part to this dialogue here. So again, why I want to kind of section this out is so that we can take it piece by piece and say part one fits with part two, part three, goes through it in a chronology, and we will culminate by answering the objections that we get from people within the church that say the promises that God made to Abram are really fulfilled in the church because of the work of Jesus. And that's what they're taught. And yet when we start to look through this elementary, piece by piece, we realize that that's something that's not going to be supported by the scriptures. And we'll see that that's a misrepresentation of what God has to say here. So very, very important that we get that, and we will take a look at that as we start next week. By that time will be part three, because I'm going to do it on this coming Monday. I will do part two of this on the back end of Isaiah chapter 7. So hopefully you're tuning in for both. You're going through the Old and the New Testament with me, as we go through it. We do every chapter, every verse of every book. And so right now, currently on Mondays, we're going through the book of Isaiah as we're going through Matthew here on Thursdays. So part 2 comes up next Monday. Part 3, a week from today, we'll be going through the second or the third of the promises, or in the sequence, I guess you can say, of these promises and how they work, whether it's ancient promises to Israel or even to our modern day. Is there any direct relation? The answer is yes, and I want to make the case for that. So tune in then for this series as we go through. We'll end up creating shorts out of them so that they're easy to put together, just looking at them in a sequential manner. So any questions on any of what I've shared here, please contact me, from the Israel trip to any of the parts that I've shared with you on this. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to be able to work through this with you as we kind of seek the Lord together, working through His Word. And just glad that you're here for Him. And if you have any questions, once again, reach to us through the ministry's website, oldpaththeology.net, and there's an email line there. You can just drop down and send me an email, and I'll respond to that. So